Years ago, a church administrator made a big impression on my father. This happened during a unique set of circumstances. My husband Sean was being ordained to the ministry, and this event took place at our church's annual camp meeting in beautiful Hope, British Columbia, Canada. It's gorgeous there. We'd invited my parents to join us for the big event, but my sister was expecting her first baby any day, and so my mom opted to stay home with her. Understandable. My dad agreed to join us, and we were surprised. Pleasantly surprised, but surprised. You see, my parents are not of our faith. In fact, we'd only been a part of our new church family for about 6 years. And so here we were at a camp meeting surrounded by people of our faith. How, we wondered, would my dad feel about the camp meeting experience? Well, we were soon to find out. Camp meeting began and we welcomed my dad, introducing him to our church family. Well, that afternoon we walked toward the big auditorium for the evening program. The sidewalk was blocked, and we detoured around it and onto the grass. The sidewalk repairs that had started during camp pitch, well, they were still being finished. A concrete mixer slowly rotated while a couple of volunteer pastors waited for instructions from the leader. The leader, dressed in a shirt and tie, ready for the evening program, had his sleeves rolled up. "Rio, that concrete will go well with your tie," Sean joked. Rio looked up with a big grin, and then he bent down and dusted off the sidewalk. We watched as, with help from the others, he poured the concrete and smoothed it carefully to even it out. All the while, that tie, it dipped dangerously close to the concrete, and his shoes were covered in concrete dust. But he didn't seem to notice. Rio grinned, happily absorbed in the sidewalk repair. Well, walking onto the auditorium, my dad commented on the teamwork that he saw in the obviously volunteer crew. "That's our conference president," Sean explained. My dad stopped mid-step and he turned back. "Your president is the guy in the tie pouring concrete?" he asked, clearly surprised. We smiled and nodded. My dad's face lit up and I could almost read his mind. You see, my dad had been a college administrator for most of his career, and he too had a hands-on leadership style. He was a servant leader. That's my definition, not his, but it really fits. "I like that guy," my dad said. Sean and I locked eyes and we just smiled at each other. Servant leadership. One of my favorite servant leaders in Scripture is Nehemiah. Nehemiah was the king's cupbearer in Babylon. This was a time of transition for the Israelite people. They had been given permission to return to Jerusalem, and some had, but others like Nehemiah were still in Babylon. The Israelites who returned to Jerusalem from exile in Babylon had a lot of work in store for them. The newly returned community had made some repairs in Jerusalem, but there was still a lot to be done. Nehemiah was made governor of Judea, and he arrived in Jerusalem to assess the situation. He saw that the temple had been rebuilt, but the city walls were crumbling. The wooden gates had been burned and they needed to be rebuilt. And so Nehemiah created a plan to rebuild. And everyone set to work. Everyone. Families worked on the portions of the wall nearest to their homes. Parents and children worked together, and Nehemiah worked alongside of them. Foregoing the usual comforts of his position, he supported his people with his own money. We're told in Nehemiah chapter 5 that rather than use the funds that he was entitled to as governor, Nehemiah used his own resources to feed more than 150 people at the governor's table every day. 150 people, not including any visitors that were there from out of the country. This was servant leadership. Now, the term might be overused nowadays. You know, it's almost a cliche, but the power of this style of leadership, well, it's anything but cliche. Well, then, in the midst of this difficult work to rebuild, Nehemiah learned of another complication. For some reason, for the first time, he learned of the desperate economic situation of the people. They had been in bondage in Babylon, but right there in post-exile Jerusalem, some of the nobles and the rulers had indentured their fellow Israelites. The desperateness of their economic situation meant that some families had agreed to the terms of dishonest moneylenders. And still worse, some families had sold their children into servanthood just to be able to care for the others. And Nehemiah, in the middle of rebuilding the wall, vital, important work, he stopped. And in righteous anger, he called the guilty to account. Here are his words. They're recorded for us in Nehemiah chapter 5 and in verse 11. What you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the nations, our enemies? That's what Nehemiah said. Nehemiah set right the desperate situation of his people. He used his personal resources, his leadership position as governor, and his empathy, all to do what was right, even in the middle of rebuilding the wall. His personal generosity, his servant leadership, they were on full display. And then he got back to work, the dust of the crumbling wall covering his sandals. You know, it's been years since Sean's ordination weekend at that camp meeting, but my dad still talks about his visit. It was a busy camp meeting weekend, and Dad joined us for all of it. We listened to sermons, we heard uplifting music, we laughed over meals together. But the part that made a lasting impression, our conference president with his sleeves rolled up, pouring concrete. Now that man is my kind of leader, my dad would tell you if you stopped to ask him about it. Servant leadership, even if it means getting concrete dust on your dress shoes, it makes a difference, perhaps even an eternal one.